Welcome to the Equipped Agronomy Podcast, where we bridge the gap between seeding equipment and agronomy. This is presented to you by Borgo Industries. My name's Curtis DeGoyer. I have alongside me Jeff Strukoff.
Hello, hello.
Hey, Jeff. We have a very special treat today.
A special guest.
Yeah, not just two agronomists chatting here. We have a special guest, Mr. Curtis Hinrichsen, who is how about you explain what you do?
Well, your equipment versus agronomy, I guess I trend on the side of the equipment more than the agronomy. So
There you go. You're
sales territory manager for Central Saskatchewan for Borgo Industries.
Central Saskatchewan. So you're kind of Melfort South?
I like to say that I cover territory from the bush in the north, so where farmland ends in northern Saskatchewan, all the way to the U.S. border.
Perfect.
And right in the central part of the province.
And you've been around equipment for a while, too. Some old history and I don't even know if you want to say. Well, MacDon's sister company, they joined up now with us. So we joined with them, whichever.
Worked with MacDon for a couple of years.
Yeah, and you've got some equipment dealership experience.
Yep, I do have, 17 years I worked in a dealership. And actually, I think I heard in one of Jeff's discussions in your previous two podcasts here that it kind of dated him when you started talking about old herbicide products, I think.
Okay.
And he was scared to date himself. Well, I'm going to date myself here. I actually worked for Borgo the first time around from 1993 till 1998, probably long before people were born listening to this podcast. But back then, the days were 8,800 cultivators with spoons on them. Everybody called them 2 1/4 inch spoons and mounted packers. And 3195s, even 2195s, and still dealt with some older products at that time were 2000 series, 2155s.
You've been around. You got some clout, though. You got some street cred.
Well, you should tell my boss that once in a while when you see him.
Well, I think, the reason that we brought you in here is to use some of that knowledge you've seen and that you have in the field right now, because you go and talk to a lot of customers. And on this particular topic, we're going to be talking about different openers. And so to lay out our openers at Borgo, we've got, I guess, kind of 3 hoe drill styles. So we have the ParaLink series. So we have the ParaLink Single, which is just a single knife. And we have the ParaLink Xtreme, which is also a single knife, but the mechanics of it are quite a bit different. And that's what we're going to talk about here today. Just to round out that family, we also have the ParaLink Dual Shank, which we're actually going to talk on in a future episode.
We'll do that in a future episode.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that one. We do have some disc drills, the ParaLink Row and the ParaLink Walker, but we're not going to talk about the disc drill openers here today. We're going to focus in on the ParaLink Single and the ParaLink Xtreme. And so this one is different, I think, than we've been able to do in the past, where, Jeff and I talk a lot about different trials and different things that we've tested. Well, this one's different because it's hard to really test that in the field, right? In a side-by-side. Because it's a single knife. We're still using the single knife with banders for the most part, on that. So that's where we thought, you know what? Let's bring in Curtis Hinrichsen on one side of the topic, who likes one type of opener. And then, me and you, Jeff, will team up
We're
on
going to gang up on it. We're going to have like a confrontational podcast today.
Yeah, we'll say...
It'll be like good cop, bad cop, and then we'll go bad cop, and then good cop, good cop.
Well, I tell you what, on this topic, it's going to take both of you to gang up on me, I'll tell you. Maybe not in football. I think I'd meet my match, but when it comes to openers, I feel pretty strong.
This is good, because this is probably a debate that happens at the dealership quite a bit too, right? And our customers are looking at it saying, well, which one is best on my operation? So I think what we can go through is just some different scenarios perhaps, or how it's set up. And then we can, at the end, I don't know if we'll come up with a conclusion, but we'll have a discussion and we'll provide some information.
I think maybe if you want to start just by giving a mechanical outline of both openers, and then we could start the conversation from there, and then we can gang up on Curtis.
Sounds good. Okay. So the 2 openers, like we said, they're both, a single shank, and you can put whichever size tip you want on. So that's the similarities of it. The ParaLink Single, PLS, has been around for a very long time. That was initially with our 3310s. So it's a 2-to-1 opener. And if you haven't heard of that before, essentially what happens is you have the frame and you have the ground. The opener is right in the middle. So if the frame goes up an inch, well, that opener goes up half an inch. Similarly, on the packer wheel, if it goes up an inch, well, then the opener only goes up a half an inch. So it's a 2-to-1 dynamic. And that's very important when we talk about our quick depth adjust.
At 2-to-1, but also two parts to that depth control, both the frame and the gauge wheel or the packer wheel, which it's both. It's actually a gauge wheel and a packer wheel. And I think that's where, when independent openers first came out, and we weren't the first, to be honest, but I think a lot of people with our first 3310 independent opener drill, ParaLink drill, I think that's what a lot of people didn't realize. They thought the gauge wheel behind that whole point or that single point is doing everything when it comes to controlling depth, but it isn't, just like you said.
Yeah. No, good point. Good point. So it's a 2-to-1. I guess you can almost say there's two different things that are affecting the depth on that. Well, there is two different things. So then we'll flip over to the PLX opener, which is formerly known as the XTC, Extra Terrain Contouring, XTC opener. But now, yeah, we've just renamed everything. It's the PLX. It's still got the extreme name in it there. And that's for the extreme contouring. And so the difference on this one, with this being a 1-to-1 ratio, is that the frame height up and down has no effect on the depth. All the depth gauging is done on the packer wheel on this one. So it's following. If that packer wheel is going up and down at 1 inch, well, that seat opener is going up at 1 inch. I guess it's kind of hard to draw out, but hopefully we've laid that out in your mind a little bit more if you hadn't already looked. But if you do want to look, just go on borgo.com. You can take a look at the two different openers in that one. So that's the mechanics of it. Is that a good general overview?
I think it's pretty
of
good.
The two that we're going to discuss here today?
PLS, 2-to-1. PLX, 1-to-1.
Okay.
There you go. There's a summary.
Okay. Now, these ones on our 3320s, there was a couple different options before, and I've just mentioned it, this quick depth adjust, QDA. And you know what? I think I'm going to throw it over to you, Mr. Hinrichsen, just to kind of give a little bit of a review of what the QDA is and how it affected each one of those openers, both past and lead into the present.
And you almost got to go to the past to see where we've come from and where we got to, I guess. So when it comes to the 3320, our engineers and our product managers had an innovative idea. Could we make an independent drill that was easy to set depth? Because if anyone has been, and I'm not going to mince any words here, if you've been under a 3310 and changed depth before, you weren't real happy with us when you were under there banging your head. It was not fun.
Any independent opener drill.
Correct.
Yeah.
You're scurrying underneath that thing on your arse and changing depth. So back then in 2012 until 2021, really choices were made as much about depth setting as they were, maybe more, about depth setting than they were about depth control and the ability for an opener to hold depth or do a good job of seating depth control. So I feel like over those years, our customers made that decision in a lot of cases because we definitely trended more to a 3320 QDA back then than we did a 3320 XTC. There was more customers buying that option because, man, it was easy to change depth on.
And it was only available with what we'll refer to now as the PLS opener, the 2-to-1, right? The
I'm glad you made that distinction.
QDA, because we didn't offer a quick depth adjust with the old XTC, or what we call the PLX opener, the 1-to-1, because the frame height didn't affect. So our QDA, just lifting the frame up and down, did not affect height or depth of that PLX opener.
And I was just at a customer a week ago, and Jeff happens to know this guy. Better not mention his name, but I was talking to him, and he would not have bought one of our independent drills unless it was easy to change depth. He just wouldn't have. In 2021, we flipped that on its rear and we changed the narrative there, so to speak, when we could give you both. We could give you a 1-to-1 opener and a quick depth adjust, or now, like you've said, a PLS can be bought with a QDA frame, and that's the only way it's sold in North America. Or you can purchase a PLX opener and have the QDA option.
So the opener didn't change. So how do we adjust our depth now if the frame height doesn't affect the PLX opener?
I'll tell you, sitting here while everyone's listening, this is the hardest thing I've ever tried to explain to somebody. My best success in explaining to somebody is when I'm standing beside a drill, looking at that opener, it's U-bolted to the frame. So it's easier to show than it is to explain, but if you want me to try it, I'll try it. So like Curtis alluded to earlier, if that frame on a XTC in the past, or now we call it a PLX, those two openers are one and the same, just different name branding. If that frame goes parallelly up, lifts parallel up, even by 6 inches, your seed depth has not changed. However, if that frame happens to tilt forward or back, so in other words, angles, I guess is what a lot of people call it, but basically that frame tilts, now you can change seed depth. Now, it doesn't give you as much range on the PLX when we tilt that frame, and that's exactly how our engineers figured out how to change seed depth, was by tilting that frame. We are a bit limited. We only get about 3/4 of an inch seed depth adjustment. That's QDA, quick, right?
I think it really helps guys make good decisions, though, now that, like previously when the PLX was around, often guys it was a big job going and changing each individual opener underneath the drill. It wasn't that big a job, but sometimes, you're in the heat of the moment and it's like, oh, do I really want to take 40 minutes and change that? It's good enough and just keep going. Well, now it's so easy. It's
with both openers.
With both openers now, yeah.
So to recap, basically our quick depth adjusts with the PLS, the 2-to-1, the frame goes up and down and it affects the depth. With the PLX, the quick depth adjust isn't up and down, it's tilt forward or back.
And what really freaks everybody out about that, when a frame tilts, well, your mind, your intuitive thoughts at that point are, well, now my back row is going to be at a different depth than my middle row and my front row. But that's not the way it works with this 1-to-1 opener. Okay. All 3 rows will seat at the depth that you set it at.
Right.
And on the intuitive part of it, look at your decal. Don't try and remember if you buy one of these, because it is not intuitive. If you want to see deeper, your back of your frame is going to come up. And that
it's the opposite. The back end goes up, you go deeper. Back end goes down, you go shallower.
That's
correct.
That's almost like a scary thought, because it's like, trust me, I'm an engineer. I'm here to help. Like, oh no.
Yeah, it's neat though. Just changing the attack angle, how it can change the depth, is really kind of neat actually.
Okay, so now we've pretty much leveled the field here as far as options, right? We got quick depth adjust in both of these openers. So now let's talk about performance in the field. Now, I guess we really didn't, flip a coin who wanted to go first on this, but perhaps I'll throw out a couple jabs on this, and then you can rebuttal and say how your customers have potentially overcome and maybe even seen improvements, right? So, Jeff, me and you started the bigger farm here in 2018. We had a PLX drill.
We did so.
Okay, so we're going to talk about our experience with that just a little bit, because we're, not a lot of experience with that one yet, and okay, what happened? So in that particular year, we had the PLX openers, XTC then. We had V Packers on it.
Correct.
V Packers on it, seeding canola. And what we found, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, is that we got a little bit too deep with that packer, I believe, right? In some areas. With the canola.
With the canola itself, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think what we found with it, because it rides on a 1-to-1 with that V packer specific, and I know there's going to be a lot of different packers we could talk about here, it's kind of squished down. So if it squished that V, then all of a sudden our depth kind of changed as we went along. So was that, something that
is that a factor of the packer, or
we just had too much pressure, perhaps? Right?
Yeah, but there was a lot of learning experiences that we had.
Yeah, nonetheless. Yeah. And so it was kind of that diving up and down in the field kind of thing on even flat ground.
I think I can add to that.
Okay.
To interrupt you here.
Yeah.
So you've got that V packer, and my experience in the field has been, because of that V packer, if you have a mellow soil in this quarter section that you happen to be seeding, or section or half section, whatever you got, if you have a mellow portion in that field, a V is going to go down into that mellow soil, softer, loamier, whatever you want to call it, soil, more than if you go to another part of your field and it happens to be a little heavier soil. It can't go down as much. But guess what? If you own a PLS or the old 3320 QDA, guess how much further it goes down on a 2-to-1? Half as much. So that you get less of an effect on a PLS with that V-style packer. I don't know if these two guys are nodding in agreement or questioning.
No, I'm in agreement so far, yeah.
So you're softening what that V-style packer does with a PLS opener, the 2-to-1 opener, compared to the PLX. That's why, personally, I think there's way too many 4.5 V packers sold on our PLX opener. There should be more on both drills, actually, in my opinion, in certain soil types, a 5.0 VU, that new style packer we have, that's got a wider V and therefore gauges depth better than a 4.5 V or the round.
It's got a little bit more of a shoulder too, so you can't overpack. Where on the V packer, that's one of the things we experienced the first year with ours. You can definitely overpack with the V, so you got to be aware of what you're doing. With that VU having a little bit more of a shoulder, it does a better job of catching depth, and you can't overpack with it.
Yeah, not only overpack, but the second discussion of that, because we know that wheel, after this discussion here, we know that wheel does two things. It gauges depth and it packs. So it's just, in my opinion, it's more critical on the PLX to have a better gauging packer wheel than packing packer wheel, if you can explain it that way.
Okay, yeah. So I think that was, it takes a little bit of extra user, what would you call it? Maybe looking a little bit. Maybe we didn't look maybe enough to understand exactly what was going to happen. And then we were also set up with that V, which is probably a little higher risk. In the really dry areas, we know where a V packer works really well. For us, it kind of worked against us on that particular thing. So I want to back it up, not back it up too far, but typically if I'm talking to somebody at the show and they're looking at a PLX versus PLS, one of the biggest things I'll ask them in that scenario is topography, right? Rolling hills versus super flat land.
V-ditches,
just rolling.
Yeah.
To me, that's where the one-to-one opener should shine, right? Because the frame height, if you got different frame heights and different parts of that drill as it's going through the field, well, then your seed depth's going to be different on the 2-to-1 opener, right? Versus the 1-to-1, the PLX, well, it's going to contour correctly in those areas.
Yeah. And we actually saw that in some of our, not that we have a lot of ditches or anything like that, but when you have a PLX opener going through some kind of a contour in the ground and the seed placement is perfect, right?
Yeah.
Right down to the bottom, right up to the top, it just follows the ground and the seeds come out of the ground just so nice.
Jeff, we're supposed to be on the PLS side of things.
Oh, we're
talking about how good the PLX is here.
When I'm done with you two, you're going to be writing checks for PLX.
Okay.
Just trust me. Because I bring a second scenario into your example. So you brought up rolling terrain. Jeff mentioned drainage ditches or V-ditches or managing the water flow in their fields to be correct. Landscaping, there you go. I like to bring up the second example, and a lot of our customers do this. If they see the same direction year after year after year, to me, there's only one opener to buy in that scenario, and that's a PLX, because you are going to get some tracks on wet years, soft ground, that don't go away if you don't do tillage, right? A harrow can't take out an impression from a 650 tire, an 800 tire that sunk in the ground 3 inches. Well, guess what happens if you have a 2-to-1 opener, the PLS, in that tire track? Guess if it's 2 inches in the ground, what's your seed depth affected by? 1 inch.
1 inch.
So if you are going the same direction, the PLX is the way to go. If you seed on a bit of an angle, remember, your whole point, your 3/4 inch knife is our biggest seller, is leading the packer wheel / gauge wheel. It's running ahead of it. So when you go on an angle, it kind of softens those ridges and ruts, I'll call them, in the field that are left over time.
Right.
So my argument to that is that if you're in a lumpier soil and the packer wheel is gauging the depth and your opener is going up and down over top of lumps and stuff like that, you get a nice smooth it's not, there's not as much chatter in a PLS opener as there is in an XTC opener.
And I think that's fair to say.
And you just kind of get a nice, smooth, undulating, better seat placement.
Yeah, you hit a 1-inch lump, your seat effect, it bounces up half as much, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Versus the PLX, it's going to take that full jolt.
I'd argue that a little bit because you're not going over a lump, you're plowing through it.
Yeah.
Maybe. But it's true. Like if you ride beside in an ATV, ride beside both of these styles of openers, you are definitely going to see the PLX move a bit more. And I caution my customers, and I feel pretty strongly about this, that I feel our operating range for the PLX should be a little bit higher. I feel like
In what instance you mean?
Pressure.
Oh, okay.
Hydraulic
Sure. Okay,
downforce pressure.
Hydraulic pressure. Because if you run a PLX at 700 or 800 PSI, if that's what you were used to with a 3320 QDA drill or your 3335 PLS drill, that opener is pretty stable with 800 PSI.
Correct.
A lot of soil types. A PLX tends not to be. And I don't think I could explain this. This would be for the engineers to explain. But because of the geometry and how that one-to-one works, you're going to see it move a lot more at 700, 800 hydraulic PSI in that cylinder that holds that opener in the ground. So I like to recommend 1,000 to 1,500. That should be the range, in my opinion, at least in my territory, that I feel people should run. And that's right from clay soil, because I have guys running PLX in heavy clay, and I have customers running it in light sandy soil too. And I feel like that's a good operating range. I wouldn't want to get down too far below 1,000. Is there a condition where you could? Maybe, but.
So that's where I think too the packing wheel is important, because if like maybe what we did, we saw it chattering.
You have a V-packer, and the V-packer's trying to find the bottom in soft soil. It's gonna find the bottom.
wants
You
to
got
keep
your
going
packing
down,
pressure too high, it's gonna go down, down, down.
Yeah, so a little wider packer wheel might help that. So if you've got a customer though, Mr. Hinrichsen, if you have a customer that, yeah, well, you have a great first name, so let's differentiate here. If you have a customer with flat land in your area, which opener, and I'll put this on there too, they don't see the same direction. Which opener are you recommending to them?
I still tend to navigate to that PLX, but you definitely made me lean a little bit to the PLS. So like anything, you guys, and I hope I don't offend any of our engineers with this, but at an engineer's computer and in their office, everything works perfect, right?
Everything's good on paper.
Everything is good on paper.
Yeah.
When you get to reality, we know both openers have some strengths and weaknesses. And so I'll go through some of them, in my opinion. So
Sure.
If you're in a rocky soil, as an example, and I didn't pay enough attention to that probably 7 years ago when I started back with Borgo again, but the clearance that the PLX opener has over a stone that you pulled out of the ground is a little less than a PLS. So the second thing is the trip force at the same pressure is a bit higher, and I think it's like 40 or 50 pounds. So rocky soil, actually a PLS will trip a little easier, and it will clear over that obstacle, a little bit higher obstacle. So I'd give a little bit of an edge to the PLS in some instances in that soil type. You might pull out the odd a couple more rocks in
With
your
the
field.
PLX.
With the PLX.
Okay.
You might break the odd opener that bolts to our shank in a rocky soil. PLS, you would do less damage. So there's an advantage, in my opinion, to the PLS, and I would edge towards that. If you want the best seed depth control, in my opinion, even in your example, Regina Plains in my territory, I'm getting some trending towards PLX openers because of what I said to you. If that 1-to-1 holds depth better than the 2-to-1 does, period. I'll give you an example. I went in a field with a customer who switched from a 3320 QDA to a 3335 QDA that had PLX openers on it. So he went from a 2-to-1 opener to 1-to-1. We pulled in the field, and he happened to have a sprayer track in there, and he had both drills still on his farm. He had one of, I'll call it the old drill, 3320 QDA, and one of the newer style PLX. We pulled in, and those drills, as it happened out, when he pulled beside each other, we did one pass with one with the other. Well, there was a sprayer track in both of our passes. Well, you could just see it plain as day, how much better depth control he got with that PLX.
In those ruts.
In those sprayer ruts.
Okay.
You hit that on an angle, that softens that a little bit, in my opinion.
Okay. Well, we're kind of wrapping up here, I think. I don't know, we've you know, at the end of the day, like we got these two options out here, and like you said, put very well. They've got their strengths, and they've got their weaknesses. So hopefully we provided.
I wouldn't say they're weaknesses. I think they're limitations. It's different.
Okay.
They both function perfectly well.
Right.
Sometimes it's just
One's
in the
better than the other.
eye of the beholder.
Yeah. Well, that's what we wanted to lay out, though. There's a couple things to bring up with that. So, I don't know if was there anything else to summarize it. You know, essentially, we just got to watch out your packers and your pressure. Those are two big things you got to, you know, kind of pay attention to on the PLX. But
I could probably bring one more thing into that. If you do want to run a wider opener, not that I don't have customers running a 2-inch spread tip on a PLX as an example, but if you want to run a 3-inch or maybe 4-inch, or maybe you are running a sideband opener like on our Trimax, I feel like the PLS reacts a little bit better. We have talked to customers, as you guys both know, at a show. If they do want to run that heavier pulling spread tip, the PLS is the one we recommend a little more often than the PLX, but both function.
Right.
Sure.
Okay. Well, hopefully we've provided a little bit of information, a little insight. I want to thank you very much, Curtis, for coming in here, and Jeff, pleasure as always.
I was really hoping it was get more heated than that.
I'm a little
disappointed right now. He actually has very, very compelling arguments to support his position. So it's not much to add after that.
Well, that's how we have the options there, because I mean, obviously sell both, and there's a fit for everybody on everybody's farm is what our goal is, right? And so just a little bit more talk about how they do fit in there a little bit better. So with that, I want to thank you very much for tuning in and listening to us go back and forth a little bit, and I hope you got something that you can use on your farm.
Thanks for joining us, Curtis.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
All right.